Okay, so this is the second course of Python. And okay, so here's a couple of objectives. The date isn't correct, ignore that. We're going to be reviewing elementary programming and giving a couple more examples. So we're going to skip this one and feel free to follow along using a Python compiler online. So you can use any free Python compiler that exists. This one I just use program is. It's pretty simple. Click run and it runs the program. Join the group me in the Google Classroom code, and this will be up in the recording for you guys. So here's a review. Yesterday was just an introductory course. It's an orientation. So we only learned about print statements and comments. So print out statement, use the print function in quotation marks, whatever you want to print out. Comments, you can use a hashtag or a pound symbol for one line, or you can enclose everything in triple asterisks. And then you can do like comment out whole paragraphs. So let's get started on some news information here. Let's focus on proper indentation and spacing. So an indent is 4 spaces. And so in programming, in Python specifically, it's very, very important that you have correct indentation. So for an example, this would be an indent. Usually people indent the first sentence of their paragraph. So that's an example. So let me show you why this is important. In this code, we have a function code that prints out 2 statements that are correct. However, if I tab over, it's going to be an error. So make sure you guys have correct spacing, and it doesn't even have to be an indentation. If I click a couple spaces, it's also going to be an error. So you guys make sure in Python specifically that you guys maintain correct spacing and don't add any unnecessary indentations if possible. And also make sure you guys space your code out correctly. This is just so that you can read it more easily. Here's a couple of simple and basic programming errors that people will be facing. So the first thing is a syntax error. So a syntax error is whenever you just write your code incorrectly and the compiler is unable to read it. So for instance, this is an example. I attempted to spell print, but I misspelled it, and then the program won't run correctly. This is an example of a syntax error. We have another thing, it's called a runtime error, is whenever the program exits because it ran out of time or the time complexity was too large. So if I try to print Ethan a billion trillion times, your computer is not going to be able to do that. And so we call this a runtime error. Another example is a logic error. So this isn't anything wrong with how you wrote your program specifically, but it's an error where you produce an incorrect output. So let's say I wanted to print out my name. The logic error is if I printed out Alex, which is not my name. That's a basic overview of the basic programming errors. So let's get started on elementary programming. So this is an introduction of programming with a step-by-step example. So here's an example code. You see this one is assigned to display the radius and the area of a circle. We'll break down these lines closely, but this first line, remember these pound symbols are comments, so these don't affect the code. But this first one assigns 20 to the variable name radius. The second line calculates the area and creates a variable called area to hold the area of the circle. And the last line prints this out to the console. So let's dive more into this. So what's the first line doing? So first line is something we called an assignment statement. And so basically a variable in Python, it's like a container. So what we're doing here is creating a variable called radius and setting it equal to some number 1. This variable in Python is like a container. You can imagine that somewhere in your storage of your computer, it's like a box that holds the data. So in this instance, we just pass a number 1 into this variable called radius. So you can imagine it as a box. And then we use variables. That way you can use them later in your code without having to print out 1 every single time. And also makes it easier to change. Does everybody understand? Okay. So let's focus on the assignment statement. So how do you actually declare a variable and use it? So first we have here is the variable called x. And this is what we call a variable name. So pretty much you can name your variable whatever you want it to be in Python. There's a couple of exceptions, but we just call it a random number here, x, which is equal to 1. So there's pretty much three parts to an assignment statement. First is a variable name that you can choose. Second is the assignment operator, which is just a fancy name for the equal sign. And then last is the value. So you can pretty much choose this to be anything you want. In this instance, we assign number 1 to x. And these other statements are modifying the assignment. So we're changing the value of x, but we're still assigning it some number. So here's an exercise. We want to create a variable called number and set its value equal to 2. So I'll demonstrate for you guys how that's done. So in this, first we want to create a variable called number, then set its value equal to 2. So number is equal to 2. And that's pretty much what this assignment wants us to do. So let me show you how you can actually use this. So for instance, if I wanted to print out what number was equal to, I would print out 2 here. Otherwise, if I wanted to print what the actual number was, it would be this. So number and 2. So make sure you guys know there's a distinction whenever you use the parentheses. So if you want to print out just the name or whenever you're printing out some sort of text, you use the parentheses. Otherwise, if you want to print what it's actually holding, you make sure you don't put your parentheses around there. So even though these two look the same, these are drastically different. So make sure you know that whenever you're going into the future programming. Okay. The next, a couple of identifiers. This is just for variable naming. So you can't name your variable whatever you want to be. You can name it a lot of things, but there are some restrictions. So first is an identifier is a sequence of characters that consist of letters, digits, underscores, and asterisks. So your variable name can only be consisting of these. You can't add any extra characters. That's going to make it like invalid. Second, identifier must start with a letter or an underscore. You can't start with a number. So even though you can have numbers in the name, you can't start with a number. Third is it cannot be a reserved keyword. So there's a couple of keywords that are used for other things. So for instance, one example is print. You can't name your variable print. And let me just see, like this. You can't name your variable print because that's going to be an error. Which should show over here. Yeah, so it should be. Make sure you name them something that's not like a print function or anything important. And then also your variable name can be any length you want it to be. So let's play an exercise, which is this a valid variable name? So this first one, is this a valid variable name? Yes, because it starts with a letter or an underscore. It's not a keyword in Python. And it doesn't have anything outside of letters, digit, underscores, and asterisks. The second one is actually invalid because it cannot start with a digit. So this, for example, if I were to put this like this, generate an error. So let's go back. This last one, sorry, not this last one. This one, underscore name is a valid variable name because you can also start with an underscore. This last one is not, and we went over this one earlier because it's a reserved Python keyword. So also, this is not as important, but this is something just as a common convention when you're coding. It's called named constants. So for example, if you're doing like calculating a radius in your circle, or in this case, like gravity on Earth, like these are always going to be constant numbers. And so just a basic thing to do here is to make the variable names like all caps if they're not going to change. So you know that pi is 3.1415. You usually don't change the number of pi whenever you use it. So it's just common practice to just uppercase it, even though it doesn't really have an effect. It's just good for you guys to know. Another thing that we have is simultaneous assignment. And so you can assign multiple variables at the same time. So this is still going to follow like the basic dichotomy of an assignment statement. You're going to have all your variable names separated by commas and spaces, an assignment operator or the equal sign, and then all the values separated by all the values separated by commas and the values. So it's important to note that this variable one maps to this expression one, variable two is the second value, and going and going. So for example, number name or number and age, for example, 14, we print out age as well. It would show like that. If there's like an uneven amount, so say like this is two variables, but this is three numbers, it's going to generate an error. And then similarly, if there's an uneven amount over here, and school, let's just say, it's also going to generate an error. So that's just common sense. And then here is a variable swapping. So if you want to change two values, set one equal to the other, you can swap them with X. So let me just show you that. And then we'll just print them out again. You change the numbers. So for this, oh, sorry. Yeah, so this first one, number is equal to 2, age is equal to 14. So we print out 2 and then 14, which you see over here. Then you switch the numbers. So you switch the variables. Then now number is equal to 2, then age is equal to 14. Sorry, number is equal to 14, age is equal to 2, which you can see here. Okay. So we have an example here. What are the variables name and grade equal to after each statement? So after this first statement, name is Ethan, grade is 11. Does everybody understand this? Is everybody following? Name would be equal to the first one, which is Ethan. Grade would be equal to the second one, which is 11. And then after this statement, name and grade is actually change so that the name would be equal to 11 and the grade would be equal to Ethan because you did a swap statement here. Okay. So it's important to note that there are a couple of different data types. So your variables, they can hold anything, but there's a certain number of categories. So the first one is an integer. So this is any form of number, and the float is the any like a number with decimal points. So integer is all your whole numbers. Float is any decimal points. So and this is going to be more important later when you actually like start using these variables together. You have to keep track of which data type which one is because you can't like divide them by each other if it's like in a different sense. So this first one, number one, is an integer. The second one, 10 is an integer, 1000 is an integer, 100.0 is a float, 1.3 is also a float. And so it doesn't change how you write them though. So say number is to 1, and then we have age equal to 2.3. It's not going to change it. This still works, but say we print number and then print age again. Yeah. So it should still work like this. Just keep in mind, I'll introduce this more later about the different data types. So let's go back to the program, this example program we had here about the radius. So here we're going to assign 1 to the variable x and assign the floating point 1.0 to the variable radius. So here's our assignment statements. And then we're going to change the value of x to become 5 times parentheses 3 divided by 2 plus 3 times 2. And then we're going to find area and these other statements as well. So to break down basically what you saw on the last page, here's a list of the numeric operators. So you have addition, which simply you add two things together. Subtraction is the same. Multiplication is the same. Float division is the same. Is the backslash, the asterisk for multiplication, backslash for division. Integer division is 0. Make sure there's a distinction between the two. This is important from the data types. 1 divided by 2 is 0. 0.5 is 1/2 if you use the floating division. But if you just divide by integers, remember, they can't hold decimal places, so that just gets eliminated and becomes 0. Exponentiation, 4 to the 1/2 power is 2, or 4 square root is equal to 2. Remainder is the modulus. If you want to find the remainder of 20 divided by 3, you're going to get 2. So let's do an example of this over here. So does anybody want to tell me what the examples of this would be? This first one, 3 integer divided by 2, what that would equal to? Well, actually, I can just show you guys. So number 1 equal to 3, number 2 equal to 2. If we want to print out number 1, number 2, that's going to print out 1. Why is this? Because remember, 3 divided by 2 is usually, well, let's show you. 3 divided by 2 in the regular calculator is 1.5. But remember, this is an integer division. So we don't hold this any decimals. So this 1.5 just gets deleted and we only hold 1. So that's why it prints out 1. 20 divided by 4, you can try that one as well. Equals to 5. It doesn't really change the output since 20 divided by 4 was 5. There isn't any decimal places anyways. It still prints out 5. Another thing is the remainder operator. This is probably the hardest one conceptually, but it's just one that finds the remainder. So this first example is 1. Modulus of 1 is we call the modulus operator. If I was to show you guys, usually 1 divided by 1 equals to 1, and the remainder is 0. So if we run this program, we should see the same thing, right? Because there you can fit 1 in 1, if that makes any sense. Next, the modulus of 2 modulus 3. You can show this one as well. So this would be equal to 2. Because since 3 doesn't even divide into 2 at all, the remainder of 2 divided by 3 is just 2. If that makes any sense. Okay, so here's an exercise. And you can pause if you want to do this one. Create a variable, add 5 to the variable, and then print the result. So quite simply, it looks like this. Create a variable. I'll just call it var to 5. A second statement, add 5 to the variable. Variable equals 2, variable plus 5. Third line is print the result of this output. So we're going to print variable. And this should do it completely. So click run, and we should see 10 because we created a variable called 5, added 5 to that variable. So 5 plus 5 is 10. So we should see 10 here. And that's correct. So let's explain this more. This first one, if you remember, is the assignment statement. So variable 5 here is our variable name that we chose. Assignment operator equals to 5. So remember again, imagine that it's a 5 in your memory, a box. And then here, variable, we're going to set it equal to the variable again, which in this case, remember, is 5. And then plus 5. So 5 plus 5, and we know that 5 plus 5 equals to 10. So now variable updates from being 5 to holding the number 10. Then print out the variable. We go into the variable, we see what's inside or what it's equal to, and that variable is equal to 10. Okay. So now here's a couple of outside resources. ChatGPT, if you guys want to learn Python outside of this video recording or this meeting, there's a couple of resources you guys can use. Code Combat is a great one. And yeah, thanks for showing up.